Welcome back. Today, we're diving into a medical mystery that's quietly affecting literally millions of people worldwide. We're talking about insulin resistance. It's the state of metabolic dysfunction that researchers are increasingly pointing to as the common root cause for a staggering number of chronic diseases. So, if you're focused on optimizing your health and you really want to understand how your body works right down to the cellular level, well, you're in the exact right place.
Now consider this for a second. What if you're actually at a high risk for diabetes, even if your standard lab results say everything is perfectly fine? You see, there's this major blind spot in modern healthcare. We tend to rely solely on standard medical checkups that only really monitor glucose. We just wait for blood sugar to rise. But as we'll learn from top metabolic researchers, by the time your blood sugar is officially high, there's been a hidden battle raging inside your body for years, sometimes even decades.
So, what exactly is insulin resistance? Well, think of insulin like a key that unlocks your cells to let energy inside. Every single time you eat, your body releases it to tell your cells, hey, take up some energy. But in a state of insulin resistance, the locks on your cells, like your muscle, liver, and fat cells, they kind of get jammed. To compensate for this, your pancreas is forced to just pump out excessively high amounts of insulin. It's producing more and more keys, just trying to force those doors open and keep your blood sugar levels completely normal. Here's our roadmap for today. Number 1, the basic concept of insulin resistance. Number 2, insulin and fat accumulation. 3, clinical signs and blood tests. 4, whole food-based nutrition. And finally, number 5, physical activity and cellular sensitivity.
All right, let's jump straight into section 1, basic concept of insulin resistance, uncovering the blind spot.
Modern clinical care typically operates on a glucose-centric view. It basically waits for high blood sugar to diagnose a disease. If your fasting blood sugar is normal, you usually get a clean bill of health. But the proactive insulin-centric view flips this entirely. Because your body will do absolutely whatever it takes to keep glucose normal, it's going to severely elevate your insulin levels to get the job done. By measuring insulin instead, we can detect those elevated levels years before blood sugar actually rises and chronic diseases start to manifest. Dr. Ben Bikman, who's a leading cell biology researcher, describes this as a metabolic Cold War. And honestly, it's a perfect analogy. On the surface, your blood sugar looks completely peaceful and normal, just flying right under the clinical radar. But behind the scenes, your insulin is fighting a massive, exhausting battle, literally shouting at your cells just to keep that glucose in check. Eventually, the body gets tired, the war is lost, and that is when blood sugar finally spikes. Moving right along to section 2. Insulin and fat accumulation, the fat trap.
So there's this chronological trap that our fat cells fall into when insulin is constantly running high. Step 1, you have an elevated insulin stimulus. Step 2, insulin acts as this one-way valve, activating fat storage and forcing your fat cells to grow. This is a process called hypertrophy. But Step 3 is the absolute kicker. High insulin simultaneously blocks the breakdown of fat, meaning it severely inhibits a process called lipolysis. You literally cannot burn stored fat efficiently if your insulin is high. It's just a chemical impossibility. Over time, Step 4 kicks in. Cellular resistance develops as these swollen fat cells start leaking inflammatory markers, which creates a really toxic environment in the body.
Which brings us to section 3, clinical signs and blood tests, detecting the clues. Even before you draw blood, your body is leaving clues for you. Your skin is actually incredibly sensitive to high insulin. As noted by experts at the Mayo Clinic, visual warning signs include things like skin tags around the neck or armpits and acanthosis nigricans. Those are those dark, slightly crinkled, velvety patches of skin, usually around the back of the neck. On top of that, carrying excess visceral fat, we're talking a waistline over 40 inches for men or 35 inches for women, and having a blood pressure consistently over 130/80, those are massive, massive red flags for underlying insulin resistance. But let's say you want to look at your blood work to get a more definitive answer. The magic number you really need to remember here is 1.5. This is the golden ratio for detecting metabolic risk long before standard tests ever raise a red flag. And the best part is, you don't necessarily need a fancy, expensive insulin test to see where you stand. You can just use the standard lipid panels your doctor probably already runs. Here's how you do it. Take your fasting triglycerides and divide that number by your HDL cholesterol, the good cholesterol. That gives you a ratio. If your triglyceride to HDL ratio is less than 1.5, that is a fantastic sign. It means your cells are highly sensitive to insulin. But if that ratio is creeping well above 1.5, Well, that's a glaring metabolic canary in the coal mine, indicating a really high risk. All right, let's get into the solutions in Section 4, Whole Food-Based Nutrition, the dietary solution. When you get right down to it, the simplest dietary intervention comes down to understanding what triggers insulin the most in the first place. Carbohydrates, specifically refined starches and sugars, those spike insulin the absolute highest. Protein causes a moderate spike, and pure fat barely triggers it at all. So, as metabolic researchers advise, we really need to reduce the consumption of refined carbs. Instead, prioritize protein, and seriously, don't fear the natural fats that come with that whole food protein. It's really just about shifting the balance of what you eat, so your body isn't constantly getting flooded with a massive insulin-spiking load. Let's turn that into some practical daily strategies. First up, try to limit food that comes from bags and boxes with barcodes. Prioritize whole foods, stuff like fruits, vegetables, nuts, beans, and lean proteins. Second, take control of how often you eat. You know that old advice to eat 6 small meals a day? Yeah, that actually keeps your insulin chronically elevated. Try to condense your eating into just 2 or 3 solid meals instead. Finally, and this is absolutely critical, step away from the pantry at night. Eating sugary or starchy snacks right before bed spikes your glucose, which then crashes while you sleep. This nighttime hypoglycemia triggers an adrenaline response, which makes you wake up feeling hot and anxious and totally ruins the deep sleep your body desperately needs to maintain its cellular sensitivity. And that leads us nicely into Section 5, Physical Activity Cellular Sensitivity, Creating Wiggle Room. Think about this for a second. When you eat a meal and your blood sugar goes up, where does all that sugar actually go? Well, a staggering 80% of that glucose is cleared from your bloodstream by your muscle mass, while only 20% goes to other tissues. Your muscles are essentially this massive metabolic sink. And simply put, the more muscle you have, the larger the sink. And this brings us to this really brilliant concept of metabolic wiggle room. By actively building muscle through strength training and then regularly fatiguing those muscles through physical activity, you actually earn wiggle room for yourself. Fatigued muscles are hungry muscles. They become exquisitely sensitive to insulin, just eagerly pulling glucose right out of the blood. This means your pancreas doesn't have to produce nearly as much insulin to get the same job done. So moving your body and carrying lean muscle mass literally gives your body a much larger buffer to safely clear glucose and drastically lower your circulating insulin. Wow, okay, we have covered a lot of ground today, from the hidden dangers of high insulin and its role in trapping fat, all the way to the practical steps of whole food nutrition and strength training. But look, understanding this information is only half the battle, right? Applying it is where the real magic happens. So I want to leave you with this provocative question to think about right now. Knowing that keeping your insulin low is the absolute key to metabolic health, what will you change about your breakfast tomorrow morning? Will it be a bowl of refined sugary cereal or a protein-rich meal that keeps your insulin nice and quiet? The choice is entirely yours. Keep learning and take control of your metabolic health. See you next time.